Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me. If possible, can someone mute themselves so that I know that you can hear me properly? Okay, welcome everyone. Right, so I shall start. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are and wherever you may be watching this. Firstly, I will just start by introducing myself. My name is Simon Jones, and I'm a publisher working for Elsevier, based in Oxford in the UK. So I look after a portfolio of journals in the decision sciences field, with such titles as the International Journal of Forecasting, the International Journal of Project Management, the European Journal of Operations Research, Omega, and many more. So I'm really pleased and excited to be here today, and the goal of this presentation is to provide everyone here with some background information on academic publishing and outline some important steps that will hopefully help you to prepare your manuscript for publication. So the four main points that I'm going to be going through today and that I'll be covering will be preparing your article, structuring your article, using proper scientific language, ethics and content ownership. So I'll go straight into the first part, which is peer review here. So a central practice in academic publishing, the peer review process is the concept of evaluating articles by experts in the field. So it's an established process which places the reviewer at the heart of scientific publishing. So the process of peer review allows the academic community to improve the quality of scholarship and to weed out poor quality and false research. Since its beginning, the peer review process has been refined, formalized and adapted for use in all aspects of scholarly publications. So peer review is now firmly at the center of scientific publishing, because through peer review and the journal publishing process, whether it's open access or the more traditional way of publishing, a researcher's work can be not only improved and validated, but also registered and preserved. So it really is a testament of the power of peer review, that or a statement that's presented to the world is largely ignored by the scholarly community. So really, without peer review, there wouldn't be any quality control in scientific communication. So this graph here shows the number of journal titles year on year. So some of the data is a little bit older here, but it's all incredibly relevant because we are seeing a kind of really steep growth in terms of the number of peer-reviewed journals, and it continues to grow year on year. So let's look at the illustration of the publishing cycle here at Elsevier, and let's consider some really quite staggering figures, actually. So 12.6 million articles are currently archived in our system, and depending on the journal, on average 30 to 60% of rejected papers are done by one of our 13,000 editors that we currently work with. So those articles that are not rejected up front will undergo peer review. And so currently we work with around 560,000 reviewers to evaluate all of these articles. And of these, around half get accepted after a kind of minor or major revision. And overall, 365,000 articles are in the end accepted by the editors each year and produced, which means typeset, posted online, and linked to various external platforms like PubMed, Science Direct, etc., and promoted to the appropriate audience, and of course archived for future use. 12.6 million articles are now available and have been downloaded well over 700 million times by well over 11 million researchers across more than 120 different countries. So, as we said, really quite staggering numbers that we can see here. So, are you ready to publish? So, a good rule of thumb, you should not consider publishing yet if your work is outdated. You would be duplicating previously published work, or if your conclusions are incorrect or not acceptable. So these points are really good indicators to make you think that your report lacks perhaps scientific interest or does not substantially advance the field or the field that you're working in. You should consider publishing a research if you have information that advances the understanding in a specific research field. This could take the form of presenting new original results or methods, rationalizing, refining or reinterpreting published results, or reviewing or summarizing a particular subject or a field. And always remember, just a little tip, that strong manuscript and message is really crucial in order to present your contributions to your scientific community. So as it shows here, what makes a strong manuscript? So strong manuscripts generally have three key characteristics. First, their scientific message is clear. It's really useful and exciting. The second is that their message is presented and constructed in a really logical manner. They enable the reader to arrive at the same conclusions as the author, and that the format chosen best showcases this particular material. And then the third is that they enable readers and the reviewers, and of course the editors, to kind of really easily grasp the significance of your research. And the most important and the most effort, that you put into a manuscript up front, the more likely it is to be accepted. So editors, reviewers, and your potential readers all want to receive well-presented manuscripts and papers that fit within the aims and scope of their journal. So different types of manuscripts. So there are various types of manuscripts that suit all kind of different purposes, really. So there's full articles, and these are the most frequent type. These are quite often substantial, complete, and really quite comprehensive pieces of research that are of real significance. And then there's letters, or can we call short communications, which are kind of quick and early communications of perhaps significant original advances in a particular piece of research. And these tend to be much more brief than full articles, and much shorter than full articles. And then there's review papers. And review papers really summarize the recent developments on a specific topic, highlighting important points that have been previously reported and introducing no new information. These are often submitted after invitation by an editor. And before selecting an article type for your manuscript, you should really first self-evaluate your work. Ask yourself the following questions, really. Is my message sufficient for a full article? Are my results so thrilling that you should be shown as possible in a short communication? And your supervisor and colleague are really good to help you and to support you with this. And ask them for advice on the manuscript type that's right for you. Sometimes outsiders can see the situation perhaps more clearly than you potentially can. So choosing the right journal as well now. So it's really important to select the right journal so that your work will reach the intended audience. If your paper is outside the scope of a journal, it will likely just be rejected immediately by the editors, and not even because of the quality, but because the topic just doesn't fit into that particular journal and what they're looking for the aims and scope. So it is really important, can't stress this enough, that you don't gamble by submitting your manuscript to more than one journal at a time. International ethics standards prohibit multiple or simultaneous submissions, and the editors do find out. Remember that, as I mentioned, that your supervisor, who of course is often a co-author, has co-responsibility for your work. So ask them for help. Ask your colleagues when you're deciding where to submit. They may be more familiar with the different journals that are relevant in your field. And investigate all candidates' journals to find out their aims and scope, accepted types of articles, readership, such things as current hot topics. And just as a little tip as well, articles in your references will usually lead you directly to the right journals. There are also tools available as well that you can use and that most publishers also provide. An example here is the Journal Finder tool, which is one that's used for Elsevier. And you can use this tool by simply putting your abstract into the website, and it will bring up relevant titles for you as well. So it's a really easy way for you to be able to perhaps do some more research on titles as you think they're most relevant. Yeah, and also going through the abstracts of these recent publications as well will really, really help you. So one consideration for selecting a journal to submit a manuscript to may be the well-known metric, the impact factor. The impact factor tells you how many times recent papers in one journal is cited on average in a given year. It does not give an indication about citations of individual papers. The impact factor can be influenced by the editorial policies of the journals and the turnover research in a certain field. So, for example, more recent citations will be made in a very fast subject area, such as something to do with genetics, for example. Also, review articles are generally better cited. So journals publishing only review articles tend to have a much higher impact factor as well. But as we saw earlier, review papers are very different to sort of the standard article papers. When considering where you should submit your work, the impact factor can give you guidance, but should not be the sole reason to submit a journal. So the guide for authors as well, which is something that all journals have and is something that should be used. Editors and reviewers really don't like wasting time on poorly prepared manuscripts. And this is why, as I mentioned, each journal typically has a guide for authors with specific details for the preparation of your manuscript. Apply the guide for authors to your manuscript and even just to the first draft. It can help you with the layout of your text, the referencing style, and figures and tables and other like really important items. This will save you your time along with the editors and of course the reviewers. So to summarize, before beginning to write your excellent paper that you're all going to write, determine if you are ready to publish your work by analysing the significance of your achievements. Decide on the best type of paper. Should it be a short communication? Am I going to go for a full article, an original article, or should it be a review paper? And then choose the target journal that is most appropriate. And of course, it has the right level of audience and prestige for your level of work. And as I mentioned quite a number of times, check the guide for authors for your target journal and get details for the manuscripts and preparation as well, to ensure that you meet those standards. So on to the next part of the presentation, which is structuring your article. So general structure of a research article here. Research articles contain many sections, and each one has a definite purpose. And at the beginning are the title, abstract and keyword sections, which all play important roles in allowing the articles to be easily found, indexed and advertised to people that you want to read your research. So you really need to make these sections really informative, attractive, and really effective, so that the article is easy to index and to search. And the main text of the article is summarized by the IMRAD acronym, IMRAD, which stands for the introduction, methods, the results, and the discussion. And this is where you must present your work and convey the main messages and findings effectively. Note that your reader's time is not unlimited, and make your articles really as concise as possible. The last group of sections brings up the end of the manuscripts and includes the conclusions, the acknowledgements, references, and any supporting materials that you may have. However, these are just artificial groupings, and the orders can, of course, change. And then there are, of course, some journals request the discussion section to be combined with the conclusion or the results section, and others need it to be just an independent section. So again, check the guide for authors to see how your particular journal wants it structured. So let's look at each of these sections and what it contains, starting with the title. So there are certain characteristics of effective titles. They should firstly attract the reader's attention, contain the fewest possible words, adequately describe content, be informative, but of course concise, and identify any main issues. And not use technical jargon and abbreviations, but really use like formal language. It's advisable to discuss the title, of course, with your co-authors so that they are fully aware and have input. And just as a little tip here as well, editors and reviewers don't like titles that make no sense or fail to represent the subject matter and adequately. And maybe even more important, you want the appropriate audience to read your paper. If the title isn't accurate, the right people may not read it, and the community might not be aware of your work. This could even lead to your paper not being seen and not being cited, and really getting the recognition and the citations that the paper deserves. Authorship. So determine the order of authors on a particular paper can really vary by discipline and culture. But the general rule and what we generally go by is that the first author is the person who conducts or supervises the data collection, the analysis, the presentation, or the interpretation of the results, and also puts together the paper ultimately for submission. The corresponding author can be the first author, or sometimes it's a senior author from your institution or your supervisor. You should always avoid ghost authorships, which means excluding authors who participated in the work, and gift authorship, which means including authors who didn't contribute to the work at all. Be consistent in how you write the authors' names as well, whether it's first name, surname, first name, etc. So on to keywords now as well. So keywords are the labels or tags for your manuscript and are used by indexing and abstracting services. So really avoid keywords that have broad meaning. Keywords should be really specific enough to give someone a really quick idea about the content of your paper and what your paper's about. And only use abbreviations that are really firmly established in the field of study and something that's kind of like really recognized by everyone. And again, check the guide for authors for specifics on which keywords should specifically be used, because some journals really do specify what they'd like to see. And then just this table at the bottom here contains actual examples of keywords that are associated with a particular article that we took from Science Direct. If the title catches a reader's attention, the next thing they check is the abstract. So the abstract is freely available in electronic abstracting and indexing services, and such as Scopus, Medline, etc. The abstract should be a single paragraph summarizing the problems, the method, the results, and the conclusions. The abstract acts as an advertisement for your article. Since it is freely available via online searching and indexing, you want to make it as catchy and accurate as possible to have the greatest impact. An abstract written clearly will strongly encourage the reader to read the rest of your paper, which is obviously what you want them to do. And the abstract really should be as brief as possible. And like really good tip here and really important tip is take the time to write the abstract very carefully. Many authors write the abstract last, so actually it accurately reflects the content of your paper and your work. So next, let's look at the process of building an article. The sequence of writing the article is not the same as reading it. So for most fields, the most efficient way is to regard the manuscript as a wall and build it like brick by brick. You start with producing your tables and figures with captions, legends, and then describe the methods used, the results found, and the discussions around these fields. The conclusion should flow on from this fairly easily. Then you write the introduction as to where your work fits into the field as a whole. Then finally, you write the introduction as to where your work fits into the field as a whole. Finally, you write the title, abstract, and keywords. This process of building the abstract is easier, more logical, and more effective than trying to write an article in the sequence that it's ultimately read in. Next is the introduction. So the introduction is used to provide context for your manuscript and to convince readers why your work advances a field of study. Be concise in the introduction, but give the reader enough information to understand why your work is important. The introductions of letters can be shorter and sometimes only is enough to just be one paragraph. And this section shouldn't be a history lesson, but you do need to introduce the main scientific publications on which your work is based. Cite a couple of original important works, including recent review articles, and give the reader a sense of how your work fits into the literature. However, do really take care to not make citations to irrelevant references, obviously including your own. Make sure that you clearly address the following issues. What is the problem you are ultimately trying to solve? Identify the solutions and limitations. Are there any solutions? If so, what is the best solution and what are its limitations? What is your work trying to achieve? And then provide a perspective that is consistent with the journal that you are submitting to. And a really important tip is here as well is, although it can be tempting to reuse introductions from perhaps previous papers or similar studies, every paper needs to present a new result, and the work should be that way minded, that really specifically motivated to that message. And this requires a unique introduction every time. So moving on to the results section, this is where you describe the importance of your research. So you should present the results that are essential to your discussion, which means that only data of primary importance should be shared, really. Data of secondary importance should be put into any supporting or supplementary material section. But don't attempt to hide data in the hope of saving it for a later paper, or you want to split the results of one project into many papers. We often see this, and that it dilutes the effect of the work and results in, to be quite frank, lower quality papers. And also there may be the possibility that you may lose evidence that reinforces the conclusions you're trying to get across. Use subheadings to keep results of the same type together. So this will make the results easier to review and ultimately to read as well for the reader. Number these subsections for the convenience of internal cross-referencing, and decide on a logical order of the data that tells a clear story. And then highlight findings that further understanding that provides, further understanding in your field, or those that differ from previous findings, and do explain any unexpected results as well. So illustrations, including things like figures, tables, these are the most effective way to present some results. Your data is the driving force of your paper. Therefore, your figures, illustrations, are critical, and they should be used for essential data only. The legend of a figure should be really brief and should contain sufficient details to explain the figure without the need to refer to the actual text, and use only color when necessary. If different line styles can clarify the meaning, don't use color or other thrilling effects that can distract from the content. And if the journal you're looking to publish in is also printed, majority of journals are online only now, but should you be looking at one that's printed as well, most of them print in just black and white. So actually anything that you do with color and fancy images may not come through. Graphs are often used as well to compare results with those of perhaps previous work, or with calculated theoretical values. Graphs should not appear crowded by any means. Try to present, I say at most 3 to 4 data sets per figure. Use well-selected scales, label the axes clearly, and use different symbols so that one can quickly kind of discriminate between the data sets. And then often tables can give the actual experimental results. And they don't really need to be long, boring tables unless, of course, absolutely necessary. And if they are, put them in the supplementary material section we spoke about earlier, and make them as easy to read as possible. And every photograph or image that you use should be presented with a scale marker, and the resolution should be really clear. So the discussion section next. So the discussion section is where you interpret what your results mean. This is the most important section of the article. This is where you get the chance to sell your data. A huge number of papers are rejected because the discussion is weak, or only includes mere description of the results and doesn't go into detail. Make sure that the discussion corresponds to and complements the results, but do not simply just repeat the results here. Compare other published results with your own, and don't ignore work in disagreement with yours. Confront it and convince the reader that yours is correct, or maybe even better. And careful not to use the following. So statements that go beyond what the results can support, non-specific expressions such as something like higher temperature or at a lower rate. Use quantitative descriptions instead. New terms not already defined or mentioned in your paper can be confusing or misleading. And speculations on possible interpretations that are based on imagination rather than rooted in fact and carefully explained in your paper. If you need to revise the results or discussion, this may involve a lot of work and require perhaps further experiments, simulations, for example. And then sometimes you may not be able to clarify your idea just in words because some critical items have not been studied substantially. So just really make sure your message is complete before you start writing or submit your article. The conclusion. So the conclusion is used to show how your work advances the field or study. Be clear in your conclusion. I mean, goes without saying, but be really clear. It helps the reviewer and of course the editors to judge your work and its impact in the field. So really provide clear justification for your work and how your work advances the field that you're in. This can be achieved by indicating users, extensions or applications of the work. Do not just repeat the abstract here, really important. The abstract and conclusions serve totally different purposes. Some of the messages may be mentioned, may be the same, but also don't list the experimental results here. Trivial restatements of your results are unacceptable in this section. Suggest future experiments that build on your work and point out any relevant experiments that may already be underway, something that you're already thinking of or something that you may already be working on. That really does show how you're thinking more and how you're going to be progressing this research. And then the acknowledgements. So the acknowledgements section includes the names of the important entities you want to acknowledge, such as advisors, any financial supporters, funders, proofreaders, or suppliers that may have supported you. The references. So the reference list is where you cite the main scientific publications on which you based your work on. So if you just take note that there are some society journals that I know of that also require a conflict of interest statement to be placed before the reference section. So again, that's something that's really important to check in the guide for authors of the journal you want to be submitting to. Some tips for having a proper reference list are don't include too many references, especially if they are only related to your work. Always ensure that you have fully absorbed and that you've understood the material that you're researching. Don't just rely on reading parts or isolated sections. Know what you're referencing. Avoid excessive self-citations of your own work or from a single region, institute or journal. Check the guide for authors again, as I say, to ensure the proper format. Presentation in the correct format is the responsibility of the author. It's not of the editor or the production staff on the journal. So really make the editor's work as easy as possible, and honestly, they will really appreciate the effort. So developing an article can really be labor intensive because it involves finding and sorting other relevant articles and correctly preparing the more formal sections, such as the references. And similarly, make contact with the right colleagues to help contextualize results, pull resources, or clarify language that may also be challenging for anyone. So just to summarize, structuring your article properly will make the work clearer, and it will have a greater impact in the field. So really make sure that each section of your paper fulfills its purpose clearly and concisely. Your title and abstract advertise your work and attracts people to read the full article. And keywords are the labels or tags that your article, for your article, that gives someone a very quick idea about the content of your article and are used by the indexing and the abstracting services that we spoke about earlier. Keywords also have impact on search engine optimization, which will support the readers to find your article more quickly. So really pay close attention to each word you use. And then just to recap as well, the main text of the article includes the IMRAD, introduction, methods, results, and discussions. The discussion is where you can really showcase the importance of your results and explain how they advance understanding in your field. And then the conclusion. So the conclusion section is used to show how your work advances the field of study of the area that you're in. The acknowledgement section includes the names of the important entities you want to acknowledge, such as advisors, financial supporters, and proofreaders. The references section is where you cite the main scientific publications on which you based your work. And the supporting materials section includes additional information, such as previously published procedures and the secondary data that we spoke about earlier. So that's the end of that section. On to the third section, which is an incredibly important part, which is the goal of using proper scientific language and the importance of using proper scientific language in your paper. So why is language important? So it's important to really take seriously the presentation of your manuscript, especially the language you use to communicate your results. Without clear and proper language, editors and reviewers will not grasp the full message or the impact of your work. Even though the findings you report might be perhaps cutting edge, poor language and quality, including errors in grammar, spelling, language usage, could really delay the publication or could lead to just a straightaway outright rejection of the paper and preventing the research from getting really the recognition that it deserves and that you deserve. So proper English should be used throughout the entire manuscript, including the captions and headings in figures, charts, and graphs and photos that I mentioned earlier. Do publishers, editors correct language? Often authors do assume this, that publishers or that even the editors will correct the language of their manuscript after it's been accepted. But that is not the case. It's actually the author's responsibility to make sure a paper is in the best form possible. It's to ensure that the content isn't changed, that any words that may reflect a certain part of something that the author's trying to get across isn't changed by a simple language, a simple word change. Although publishers don't correct language, there are resources out there for authors who are less familiar with the perhaps conventions of a wide range international journal. Please check publishers' websites because there are resources, as I mentioned, that may perform technical screening prior to peer review, and if your paper doesn't meet the language quality, which it basically means it doesn't meet the journal's minimum standards, it could be returned to you for improvement. So the key to presenting your work well is to write clearly, objective, accurately and concisely. Foreign language students really should, something like practicing written English at any moment they can, and even keeping records in English during their research to practice their language skill will be incredibly beneficial and helpful. It's obvious that you should try to prevent spelling errors by just using a simple spell checker in English. But the other most common language errors involve sentence construction, so too long sentences, using incorrect tenses, incorrect grammar, and incorrect use of English throughout the paper. Again, you should always read the journal's guide for authors to check for any additional language specifications that the journal may have. And if you need those resources that are available to check the language of your paper, those are available. Or, please do speak to someone in your institution, your supervisor, to help as well. To write a successful manuscript, first be aware of the sentence structure you see. Sentences should be constructed in short factual bursts. Long and complicated sentences tend to confuse readers. Only one idea should be conveyed in each sentence, and multiple statements should be avoided in single sentences. The average length of sentences in scientific writing is only about 12 to 17 words. You must also take care to use the proper tenses, when describing your work and finding. The present tense should be used for known facts and hypotheses. For example, the average life of a honeybee is 6 weeks. The past tense should be used for describing experiments that have been conducted and the results of these experiments. So again, for example, the average lifespan of bees in our contained environment was 8 weeks. Being concise and correct in your use of tenses makes your paper easier to understand for the reader and the editor. And pay special attention to the grammar used in your manuscripts. One way to help make the work and results clearer for the reader is by using the active rather than the passive. The passive can be used in the methods section of the paper, but otherwise the active voice will usually shorten sentences and make them more dynamic and interesting for the reader. You should avoid contradictions such as it's, isn't, or weren't, which aren't often used in professional writing, and avoid abbreviations except for those kind of really well-known ones, unless you've clearly defined them within the paper. And you should minimize the use of adverbs, eliminate redundant phrases, and always double check unfamiliar words or phrases. So just as a recap, the purpose of publishing a manuscript is to communicate your message to the research community. If your manuscript is poorly written or presented in a way that makes its message unclear, there is a risk that reviewers, editors, readers may not understand it. So to really ensure that your work is comprehensive, it's really essential that you use proper English language with concise sentences, correct tenses, and of course, correct grammar. Consult the journal guide for authors for any additional specifications. And as I kind of touched on earlier, we always recommend that you ask a native English speaking colleague to help you edit the final version before submission, or use one of the editing services that I mentioned. So on to the next part here, which is publishing ethics and content ownership. So as this slide states here, being an author comes with credit, a huge amount of credit, but also with considerable responsibility. They are two sides of the same coin, really, and author responsibilities include originality, declare any conflicts of interest, and of course, as we mentioned earlier, about authorship as well, and declare correct authorship. So just some examples here of types of misconduct as well. Plagiarism, obviously including self-plagiarism, and falsification of data. So it could be deleting outliers, p-hacking, accepting guest or gift authorship, and ghost authorship that we mentioned earlier as well. Paper slicing, any conflicts of interest, dual submissions, lack of ethical approval, and reviewer fraud. So I've written my paper, but who technically owns it? This really does provide a baseline, really understanding the next part of copyright and content ownership, which is quite in depth. So I do apologise, but hopefully it'll help you in some context. So just to break it up a bit, we've got some myths or facts here as well on copyright fundamentals. So authors, and in some cases their employers, have the right under national copyright laws and international treaties to control how their works are to be used and distributed to others. Myth or fact? This statement is a fact. Authors and sometimes their employers, if the author employer have an agreement in place as part of the author's employment, retain the right to the use and distribution of their works under national copyright laws unless the author signs away these rights. So the next one, copyright protects the underlying facts and data, the ideas of your work. Myth or fact? Myth. This statement is a myth. So copyright only protects the way in which the ideas or the concepts are expressed, not the underlying facts themselves. Someone else could describe or express some facts or results in a totally different way from you, and that would not be considered as copyright infringement. Myth or fact, sorry, copyright protects the way you express your thoughts and describe your research and conclusions in your writing. So myth or fact, this statement is in fact a fact. The extent of copyright allows the creator of the work to permit the copying, distribution, online access, translation, and creation of other works of research. So myth or fact, this statement is also a fact. The extent of copyright does allow the creator of the work to permit all of the following: copying, distribution, online access, translation, and creation of these works. The original creator of the works has all the rights in the case of Elsevier, transferring or licensing these rights to us. So myth or fact, journal publishing agreements generally only spell out rights granted to the publisher. Myth. So publishing agreements also usually include author warranties, as it says here. Generally, these are statements that certify the work that was created and conducted in an ethical and ensure that it's an ethical and compliant manner. There may also be certain special provisions for government works. For example, US government works are to be in the public domain. UK government works are to be owned and licensed by the UK government. Rights retained by authors publishing in a subscription journal. So these rights are spelt out in the publishing agreement and typically address academic usage, the academic usage rights. So use of the work in an author's teaching and reuse of the work in other scholarly works. So it's really important here to note that publishing agreements vary by publisher. So you really need to ensure that you read this correctly. Rights retained by authors publishing in open access journals. The rights retained by the author and the rights permitted to the user of the articles are set out in any user license selected by the author at the time of publication. The user licenses offered to the author differ very much by publisher, and some user licenses allow commercial reuse while others allow only non-commercial reuse. So the user license terms will cover how the article may be copied, reproduced, and distributed. Publisher agreements do vary, as I mentioned, and they are less restrictive terms, or the less restrictive terms do apply to Elsevier titles that are published open access. So in Elsevier's case, our author agreements allow the following: copies of the article for classroom teaching, articles to be included in course packs for educational purposes, copies of the article for sharing with fellow research colleagues, copies of the article for those attending a meeting where you are presenting the article. And then an article can be expanded to, say, a book form or used in a thesis or dissertation. And articles can be used for any patent and trademark rights. But as I mentioned, please ensure that you do check the right specific guidelines for the journal as well that you're looking for, or the publisher indeed. So other allowances and restrictions here, an Elsevier sharing policy permits sharing of the article. Preprint anywhere at any time. Preprint should not be added to any enhanced sorry, should not be added to or enhanced in any way in order to appear more like or substitute for the final version of articles. Accepted manuscripts privately with students or colleagues for their personal use. Authors can update their preprints in Archive, for example, or RePEc for their accepted manuscript privately on institutions' websites, your personal websites, blogs, privately on any commercial and partner sites as well. And then after embargo, publicly on non-commercial platforms, and then publicly on commercial partner sites. And then your PJA, so the published journal article, gold open access articles can be shared anytime, anywhere on non-commercial platforms. Via commercial platforms, if you, the author, has selected a CC BY user license, or the platform has an agreement with Elsevier. And subscriptions articles can be shared as a link anywhere at any time, privately with students, colleagues, or for your personal use, and privately on commercial partner sites. Check your publishers' websites. These are all spelt out really, really clearly. And then other allowances and restrictions as well. So Elsevier's hosting policy, platforms such as repositories, preprint servers, and scholarly collaboration networks can host research published by Elsevier under the following guidelines. So non-commercial platforms can host metadata and links to articles. Preprints anywhere are available. Accepted manuscripts publicly, but after embargo, in gold OA articles. Commercial platforms can host metadata and links to articles, and preprints anywhere at any time, and gold open access articles with a CC BY license. And then just finally as well, other allowances and restrictions. Elsevier's commercial purposes prohibit certain restrictions here as well. So Elsevier defines commercial use as the use or posting of an article for commercial gain. And there's some examples here, such as advertising, full text of the articles, hosting services, or to substitute for the services provided directly by the publisher. For example, article aggregation, systematic distribution via email list or share buttons, posting, promotional marketing activities, for example. So further reading on everything that I've presented to you today can be found on the Elsevier website, elsevier.com. There are some links here that you can follow and that you can literally just Google researchacademy.com, Elsevier.com authors, Elsevier.com reviewers, Elsevier.com editors, and everything that I've gone through here today and more is on these pages for you to download, for you to read, for you to understand, that will help you in the best way possible to write your paper, whether it is for an Elsevier journal or elsewhere. The easiest thing to do is just to Google Elsevier.com for authors, reviewers, and editors, and that will get you into the right pages. So thank you for your time. My details are here, Simon Jones, publisher. This is my email address, s.jones@elsevier.com, and my Twitter handle here @SimonJElsevier. You will see the large in between the thank you. I've put a code here as well, which is a unique code for anyone attending this session today. RWSPZL. I've also put it in the interaction in the notes section within the page as well, that you'll be able to see if you just click on the notes section. If you use this unique code, you will be able to download a unique certificate for this particular conference, this particular presentation, and a certificate for attendance. So I'd like to thank you for your time. And yes, thank you very much. And any questions, please do feel free to email me or contact me at Twitter. And I thank you very much for attending, and have a good day, morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Thank you. Bye-bye.